I'm Michael Clark, and you're watching Meet the Farmer TV. Coming up next on Meet the Farmer TV.
We can create jobs with this small, sustainable farms. We can create jobs. We have created 36 jobs, paying between $30,000 and $60,000 a year. So it's important. It's really important to make sure you anchor. I always believe you have to anchor people into good paying jobs, because remember, I'm working with folks that never farmed, a lot of them. So I need to anchor them. It takes us about 2 years to get them so that they're really productive.
Meet the Farmer TV is independent reporting to get you the best information about local food and food from the farm to your plate. This program, the production of Meet the Farmer TV, LLC, in association with Planet Earth Diversified, Nelly Productions, and Leslie P. Jenkins Photography and Graphic Design.
So this is our urban site. So it comes in, I remember this load, it was 20,000 pounds of tomatoes and peppers. So we threw it in a pile. Okay? And then we put wood chip and brewery waste in there, and brewery waste is great because it breaks down that cardboard, because it's wet, very wet, and biological stuff starts right away. It's already started. So, you know, you see the snow, it burns, it's 150 internal degrees, and the pathogens are being taken care of. No worms in there. Now look at the houses right behind it. Okay, we're doing this in a high, dense area, but we've done our work up front. The community has accepted us to be able to do that. They're not getting on the phone calling the Department of Neighborhood Services, and folks are rolling out there in these big white trucks and telling us we got to stop what we're doing. Because we've worked with their kids and over time, and we've invited them into process. We host their neighborhood block groups and so forth. So you have to do a lot of that community work to be able to do this stuff. Because I can't guarantee when we're loading trucks after this is finished, you know, we're going to get some anaerobic smells that drift in the wind. If the wind's blowing, it's going to go over there. But they're going to call us instead of calling the city. And that's the position you want to get in, and that's the kind of engagement you want to reach, to that point where you're looked at as an asset enough that they're going to call you instead of the city. So that's the way it looks. And then,
what do you do with all the plastic, like zip tie, metal wire?
Great question. Question is, what do we do with all the plastic? Well, we don't accept the plastic. That's part of the engagement with Malio Produce and Tropic Banana Produce Company and the restaurants, is we don't want stuff. We don't want stuff wrapped, like heads of lettuce wrapped in plastic, or we don't want ties and so forth. So they separate that stuff for us because we've developed that relationship for them. Remember, we're saving them $3,000 a month. Yes? When it comes, it's gone through the cooking process. It's hot and wet, and they load it on a trailer, and we get it to our site and incorporate it right away.
So you pay for pickup?
No, we don't pay anything.
Do you do the pickup?
We do the pickup of some of the stuff. Some of the waste comes in, people deliver. Some of the waste, like the large quantities, we have trucks, 24-foot straight trucks that we load the pallets on and bring it to our site or the other sites that we have now. So this is a workshop. The most efficient, yes.
That big pile you showed us in the previous picture.
Yes.
In the winter, how long does that take to be completely composted and ready to be moved on?
It takes between 6 months and a year. In a static state, we don't turn it. No. It's the way we construct it with carbon and nitrogen, 75% carbon, 25% nitrogen, because that's what's in our waste stream. Our nitrogen waste is only about 25% or less in all communities. So to teach people how to do this, the most efficient way of doing this is in a pallet configuration, and some of you have probably done this, and we put layers of carbon and nitrogen. You can't be real anal in doing this because we're trying to crank out compost. So if you're 50-50, that's cool. But we want to be about 75-25. So this is what, when people come to our workshops, which we've been doing for years, we hold last year about 15 hands-on workshops. This is what people do. Whether it's 20 below zero, if you come to our workshops, you're going to do this. I teach this class, and we have one of your Virginia folks here that comes to our commercial training program. We have several training programs, and she'll tell you. If you want to ask her, you know, ask her about a couple weeks ago, or last month, our first January workshop, how cold it was. Yeah, and last week as well, yeah, our second month. So, this is how the workshop participants do it. And this is the finished product. That's what it looks like. 6 months to a year later, that's what it looks like. And now our rural farm. You want to crank it up? You want to do a 2,000, 3,000 yards? This is how we do it. We do it the same way on our rural farm. And the reason we do that is we don't have the capacity in our organization to be out there turning it and to buy a $100,000 turner to be able to do as much waste as we are able to collect. So we do it in a static situation. Same way. Long windrows, big piles. We have a bobcat that helps, but before 2 years ago, we did it all by hand. The runoff, no, not in this site because we're way away from waterways. We're in the middle of a hayfield. We don't have a problem with that. If you're going to do a more sophisticated type site, the sites of the future that we're planning in the city, we're going to have a runoff collection that we pump back into the piles. And that's part of what we're doing because we just got a new site in the city of Milwaukee. And we'll be doing some of that in terms of building a pad and having an area for the tea to run off, and we'll pump it back into the pile to keep the...
What are you building that out?
We're actually going to use some type of packed down material. It's not going to be concrete. To do that, a special kind of green material, because everything we do is, we're trying to be as green as possible. Okay, so now you create the compost, and we need fertilizer, organic fertilizer, and I'll argue with anybody here that vermicompost, worm castings is the best fertilizer there is. What worms do is just unbelievable. They're the only organism that crushes E. coli. They increase bacteria. If they take in 250 million count bacteria, they'll multiply that by 13 times. So their 13, 14 times their casting is 250 million times 13 more beneficially bacteria. So worms are wonderful. We have 5,000 pounds of worms. We started as a youth project 13 years ago with 30 pounds of worms. We now have over 5,000, probably more, pounds of worms. And we ship them all over the country. I shipped some here yesterday, came today. Red worms, Senia fetidas, Perionyx excavatus. We have about 7 different varieties of worms in our systems.
Do you have a preference for the fertilizer that any of one makes up the other?
Do we have a preference? No. Unlike human beings, they live harmoniously together, you know. You know, you could have put 2,000 and they don't argue with each other. They kind of just...
So you mix them all together, all the different kinds?
Well, that just happens, you know, because we're transferring worms from systems, and during a 4-month process, you get a lot of, you get tremendous reproduction. I studied worms for about 5 years, what they eat, you know, how they talk, the whole bit, you know. So. I couldn't farm without worms. We put worms are in every pot, in every flat, in every bed that we have. We inject worms in everything.
Do you use the 7 different varieties for any particular reason?
No, that's the way they came. You know, we got worms from Florida originally at the Youth Project, and then a friend of mine, the kids didn't do so well with the plastic bins, and a friend of mine gave me some of her worms, and somebody else gave me some of their worms, and that's why we have such a variety of worms, which is cool. Oh, this guy really likes it, you know. So, that's one of our workshops. And now this is how we get the worms out. I don't know if anybody here do vermicomposting? Okay, this is a technique I use. After the worms have been in the boxes for 3 to 4 months, I go home and I cut off my window screens off my house and I lay them on top of the box and put compost, fresh compost, and they crawl through the screen, 1/16 mesh screen, to the top side. That's the friendliest way without hurting the worms, because those aren't really, we look at our worms as livestock. When you look in terms of, you've got 5,000 pounds of worms and they're worth between $25 and $35 a pound, you've got quite a big investment or asset. I look at it as an asset. Yes, yes. And then you put compost on top of the screen, and guess what they do? They come up through the screen. They actually fit through. They eat the compost above, and they're going to stay up there because there's fresh food up there. You have to do that about 4 times to get to 90% of the worms out of the box. You're not going to get them out because you got cocoons down there. You could screen this thing for the rest of your life and never get them all out. So they fit through the screen. And then each worm then produces enough offspring to start 4 new worm boxes. Our boxes range from, this one holds 3,000 pounds of compost, the other ones hold 1,000, and the other ones hold about 800 pounds. So this is the system. Below the system, because we use vertical space, when you're growing inside greenhouses, your space is very valuable, so you have to use all the space. So you take 3,000 square feet and you turn it into 4,500 square feet of growing space by using the vertical space. Every bit of space is important. And you can see over here, we have the worm boxes. Above the worm boxes, we have a hydroponic growing system where we're pumping water through the system, nutrient water. Above that, we have pots hanging above that. And you'll see that as you look at some of the other images.
If we could look at that worm bed just a minute, it looks pretty wet. How are you getting water on those worm beds? And it looks more moist than what I'm used to seeing. What kind of moisture are you after there?
Yeah, you have to keep them moist, simply because these are manure worms. These are worms that eat up our waste. And that's what they can't be in a dry situation, because if they're in a dry situation, mites will get on them and kill them. So as long as their bodies, if you pick up a worm, it's nice and shiny. As they go through the soil, they're vertical, they're parallel dwellers. Whereas night crawlers are vertical dwellers. These are parallel dwellers. These are the ones that you see in your backyard with little crumbly piles. If you go in your backyard, you'll see those are worm castings. If you could go around and pick up all of those, you'd have some great fertilizer.
But to water the bed?
We water them down. Got to keep them moist.
I'm seeing a lot of hand labor in all this.
Absolutely.
How are you paying for your workers? Are you paying for them and getting volunteers?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm all about job creation. That's what this is all about. And I'm glad you brought that point up. He sees a lot. The question was, I see a lot of hand labor. Absolutely. Because our situation as a nonprofit, we're kind of a hybrid organization. On one side of the street, we have our about 15 different income streams. On the other side of the street, we have our social responsible stuff that we're doing in terms of training youth, working with schools, working with farmers, to educate folks and do all that socially responsible stuff. You can't do it on grants alone. So we have to have this business piece that cash flows to pay for this piece. So, and our thing is about job creation, and we've been identified as one of the groups that may receive some stimulus funding because we, thank you. Hold you, cross your fingers, because it's a, we put in for a $60 million to our city and the state. But anyway, the reason is that we've created, I started just volunteering. I have my own farm. I bought this place to sell my farm produce, not to do what I'm doing today. But I got sucked into this. You know, whenever you work with kids, you get sucked into stuff, you know. Kids are very powerful. Anyway, that's a great, I'm glad you brought that up, because we can create jobs with this small, sustainable farms. We can create jobs. We have created 36 jobs, paying between $30,000 and $60,000 a year. So it's important, it's really important to make sure you anchor. I always believe you have to anchor people into good paying jobs, because remember, I'm working with folks that never farmed, a lot of them. So I need to anchor them. It takes us about 2 years to get them so that they're really productive. So they're just not doing grunt work, that they can think on their own, because I'm not a micromanager, and they're going to have to think on their own. But we need to produce jobs. We can, and that's one of the models that we have to present to the city. The city knows that. In Milwaukee, we brought in 5 national conferences in the last 5 years. Growing Power has, to the tune of $3.5 million. The city has quantified that, so they look at us as an asset to the city. So therefore, we have an opportunity for things to happen, like the city's given us recently 100 acres of land. They have Brady Corporation, just a large corporation, has land that they call me and say, we're not using this land, can you use this land to grow food? We have a project in the Menominee Valley downtown with the power company to divert hot water to be boosted by Johnson Controls wood burning furnace that's burning wood, that diverting wood from the landfill, because our landfills are taken up by more waste wood than anything else, and DNR doesn't want that waste wood going into the landfills. So these high-tech wood-burning furnaces would boost the temperature of the water that comes out of the power plant at 90 degrees to over 200. We'll run it through greenhouses up the valley into the other industry that needs, our tanneries that need hot water, before it goes into the Milwaukee River as cold water. So those are the kind of things that can happen that are related to agriculture, that are related to other industries. Okay, so we sift the castings. Worm depository. What is a worm depository? Anybody know?
Bank account for worms.
It's a bank account. I like that. That's a great, I'll use that one someday. It's a worm nursery, so we have to grow biomass. Oh, that's number 3 that fell. Biomass of worms, because we need those worms to inject into our beds, into our gardens, and to pass them on to other folks that want to do this kind of farming, to start more depositories. As I travel around the country and around the world, I build these on farms. Sometimes I come back a year later, there's no worms in them. Because guess what? The worms are livestock. And what do you have to feed livestock? Food. So they eat their weight daily. And it's hard for us to wrap our minds around the fact that you have to feed worms, eat their weight daily. So if you have 10,000 pounds of worms, you need 10,000 pounds of food a day to feed them. And that's hard for us to wrap our minds around. Yes, you had a question.
Do they make it through the winter? Do the worms survive the cold?
Absolutely. We have more worms in this outside depository than we do inside. And why do they survive the winter? Is because the internal temperature of those piles is over 70 degrees. And worms like to be in about 70 to 90 degree temperature. And because of the amount of material that we have in this depository, there it is. That's a depository. It's covered with snow. If you dig down 2 inches, you'll find worms flourishing. Heat rises, the worms are up top. Down below, because this is a permanent depository. You have a lot of worm castings and compost that has decomposed. But these are worm depositories that we have on site. And there's tons of worms, because the worms don't know whether they're indoors or outdoors. They only, you know, it's nice and warm, you know. They don't care where they are. Yes? Do we chop? Absolutely not. We pre-compost the food waste, and then we bring that food, after it's broken down and it speeds up the process, we bring in the compost inside and put them in our boxes. But in this case, in this depository, we're feeding it primarily coffee grinds. We get 2,000 pounds of coffee grinds a week from our coffee roasters, and we get 30,000 pounds of brewery waste, so we primarily feed them that. And those two things create the most heat that I've found in my research. There's three things that create a lot of heat. Wood chip, if you combine wood chip, brewery waste, and coffee grinds, that creates the most heat, and I'll show you what we do with that in a minute. Do we have any other question? Yes.
It's obvious that you know, there's different organisms that dwell in the 120 degree and above. How do you regulate so that if it gets too hot, these guys either get cooked or they have to dive down or something? How do you regulate that temperature so it doesn't get too hot for the worms?
Okay, the worms are, when you have a big system like this, if it gets too hot in the middle, those worms will move just like in a bowl of soup or whatever. It's cooler around the outside, so they'll go up to the edges. So a lot of times if it gets very hot, about a month ago, my staff, I was on a trip and they added too much waste and it got it really hot. But the worms didn't die because this system is so large that they can move and find safe places. But if they were inside a little plastic bin or a box, they would have no place to go if it got too hot, and they would melt down and you'd have a smell. You know, some of you who've done it know what I'm talking about. So these are the depositories. Now, how do you do aquaponics the way that we do it? Does anybody know what aquaponics is? Okay, we have some folks that probably have done aquaponics either on a small scale or a large scale. We do it at Growing Power. We've been doing it for about 13 years, raising tilapia. This year we'll raise about 50,000 fish that we market to our restaurants and other folks. But we recently, 2 years ago, we started raising lake perch, which is a cold water fish that can survive in cold water. But the water quality has to be much better than tilapia. Tilapia are cichlids. They eat vegetable waste. They'll eat anything. They'll eat algae. They eat as they breathe. So they grow very fast from a fingerling size, almost like a mosquito larvae size, to one as big as my hand in 6 months. So in this system right here, this is a new system, in ground, 4 feet down, 10,000 gallons of water. We have 10,000 lake perch in this run. One operating piece, a pump that lifts the water up in gravity, and water pressure moves the water. It's a natural recirculating system, low energy input, $3,000 to construct. Commercial system would cost you $50,000. So we work with the Great Lakes Institute that comes in every week and does our water quality testing. We put these fish in last April at fingerling size, and they're going to be ready end of this April. We'll harvest about 8,000 fish out of that. Not all 10,000 will reach full size. Some of them stay at a certain size and never grow, simply because they only take in the food that they need to survive. I don't know. Somebody who's a fish scientist can probably tell you the answer. I'm just interested in growing fish and eating fish and selling fish, you know. We don't breed these fish because you have to manipulate the water temperature. It takes 3 years for these fish to reach full size in Lake Michigan. We do it in 1 year because the water temperature is consistent between 17 centigrade and about 25 in the summertime. And food is available all the time because we have automatic feeders. Yes?
Does Does that water the fish live in? Do you pump that for your crops that you're growing? Well,
No, that's a closed loop system.
how do you keep the water clean and neat?
Oh, that's a great question. How do we keep the water clean? That's a great question. The plants. There's a symbiotic relationship between the plants and the fish. The fish give off ammonia in their waste. Ammonia turns to nitrate, and then the plants take it out. We've come up with a plant that's an edible plant that we sell for about $16 a pound that most of you collect in the creeks. It's called watercress. We grow lots and lots of watercress. Watercress is the best filter plant that I've found. This is a modular system. You can make it 50-gallon tank in your basement, size the beds to whatever you want, 250, 1,000 gallons, 5,000-gallon tank, and build your beds accordingly. These are built above ground.
You feeding the fish worms?
We are feeding them worms, but I'm going to show you something else we're feeding them in a second. You can see the watercress on this lower bed. Above it, we've got tomatoes. Very efficient, growing at over $5 a square foot in these systems. You're getting a product before the fish is ready. So you're harvesting vegetables, and then when you get into your fish, for example, the system that you saw in the other frame will produce about $48,000 worth of product in April in 1 year. So that little footprint of space, very low energy input, very little maintenance input other than keeping the filters clean, adding makeup water every few weeks. Otherwise, the system runs by itself.
One more question. Is that city water, chlorinated water?
Yes, when we fill up the systems, because our water catchment system that we have, we do catch water off a roof, but we don't have enough for the size of facility, so we have to dechlorinate the water. So it takes, the experts say 6 hours, but we let it go for several days before we inject the fish. And once you get 10,000 gallons of water, and if you add any chlorinated water as makeup water, it doesn't have an effect on the fish because of the amount of water you have in the system. You can grow things like nasturtiums. We grow everything in pots with our compost and our vermicompost that sits in the water. We do grow a few koi. Kids like them. But these are the lake perch. Those are full-size lake perch. We market those for $6 a pound. They go for filleted when we take them to our processor for about $16, $17 a pound.
Well, there you have it. Another episode of Meet the Farmer TV. This program is a production of Meet the Farmer TV, LLC, in association with Planet Earth Diversified, Nelly Productions, and Leslie P. Jenkins Photography and Graphic Design.